This morning I want to talk about the incredible power God has given human beings, the power of naming. We see it in the early chapters of Genesis. God lines up all the animals, and he tells Adam to name them, to label them. Now, labels can be really good and labels can be really bad. In fact, the way we label other people, certainly according to the Bible, seems to point back to our own heart condition. The labels to which we give people seem to be an insight into what's going on in our spiritual life. We have a choice, and we're going to look this morning at 1Samuel chapter 24, where David has a confrontation with the king of Israel, Saul. Now, Saul has been unfaithful, and the prophet has come to Saul and said God is removing the kingdom and giving it to another one. And in fact, word on the street is that other one is the young shepherd boy who slew the giant Goliath named David. And so David is now going to be anointed as king. And Saul knows this, and it throws him to a fit of rage, even though his son Jonathan is best friends with David. And even though David is the only court musician that seems to be able to soothe Saul's demon-infested soul when he gets out of touch with reality. And so here's the context in 1 Samuel 24. Saul is chasing David all over the countryside, trying to kill him, execute him, so he can't fulfill this prophecy of being the new king. So David and a few, what later he calls mighty men, are hiding in caves and hiding in the desert and trying to figure out how to get away from Saul and his army. So here he is on the run in the last few chapters of Samuel, and the story tells us that God keeps delivering David. Saul has him cornered at one point in a canyon, and messengers come from back in Jerusalem and say, you got to come home. We need your help. If there's an emergency, we're being attacked right now. And so instead of taking David then, he has to take his whole army back home. And once again, God has delivered young, soon-to-be King David. Well, we're going to pick up the story when the tables turn, and all of a sudden, David has the opportunity to take out Saul. I'm going to read 1 Samuel chapter 24, 1 Samuel 24. I'm going to read, to start off here, the first 7 verses. Here's what it says. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Do you understand what that means? Saul had to go to the bathroom. So he goes inside this cave. He's going to take a leak, and all of a sudden we find out, the text tells us, David and his men were far back in that cave. Verse 4 says, the men said, this is it, David. The day of the Lord has been spoken to you. He told you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So David crept up unnoticed and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Verse 5 says, afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord should forbid that I do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul in the cave. So Saul left the cave and went his way. It's an amazing story in the Old Testament, this story of Saul trying to catch David, but he goes in a cave to relieve himself, and it just happens to be the cave that David and his men were hiding in, and they could have completely destroyed him. In fact, the men are jumping up and down saying, here it is, here's the opportunity. You got a chance to take out your great enemy here. But David doesn't do it. In fact, something strange happens. It tells us in verse 5 and 6 that David actually crept up and cut off the corner of his robe. Now, a king's robe would have been something unique and special, so he must have taken a piece of the robe that would demonstrate that he had actually had the opportunity to kill Saul and didn't take it. And so David, we're told, gets conscience-stricken. He feels guilty, even about just taking the corner of his robe. He says, look at it again. David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed." Now, David has every right to see Saul as an enemy. Saul's been chucking spears at him. Saul's been trying to turn his son and his daughter and his troops and everybody else against David. He's been hunting him down in the desert of En-Gedi. He has every reason to call him his enemy, but David chooses not to, because he says, no, this is the Lord's. He's still the king of Israel. He's still God's anointed man. Now, David does not accept what his men tell him. His men say, now wait, God told you that he was going to deliver Saul into your hands to do whatever you want to him. But David reminds them, no. He promised me that he would give me the kingdom. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I will not take that to mean that I should touch the Lord's anointed. Very interesting choice there. God told David that he would deliver him. He did not tell David, so go execute Saul. A lot of us would do that. We would say, well, the end justifies the means. Obviously, Saul's evil and turned against God, and so we have every right to kill him. That would be a good thing, wouldn't it? But David doesn't see it that way. You see, David has a choice of two different labels to put on Saul. He could either label him as enemy, which was true, or he could label him as God's anointed, the anointed one. So David makes a choice here, how he's going to label Saul. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, is how we choose to label people. Because David has a choice: enemy, fully justified, or God's special creation, anointed, and God will deal with him as he wants. No wonder Saul's response here, when he hears that David has taken just the corner of his robe, and he hears the David saying, see, I could have killed you, but I didn't, because I believe you're God's anointed. I didn't mean to harm you. I don't want to harm you. It says that Saul wept aloud. Saul knew, you had me, man. God delivered me into your hands, and you didn't do anything about it. You didn't choose to act on it. Listen to verse 17 through verse 21. This is Saul's response when he hears that David had a chance to kill him while he was taking a leak in a cave, but he chose not to. Saul says this: you are more righteous than I am. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me this day. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now, David, please swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off all my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. And the conclusion says David gave his oath to Saul. I will not do that. Amazing, isn't it? Saul says, and you're a better man than I, David. If I would have had the opportunity, if I'd have caught you taking a leak in a cave, I would have taken you out. I would have chucked my spear right through you, but you didn't do that. And it left Saul puzzling. What is this? What is this that makes David not willing to take vengeance out on me. Here's the point I think this passage is making, and it's made over and over again in Scripture. The way we treat our enemies, is the true measuring stick of our spiritual life. One of the greatest English scholars to ever live was a man named C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis later in life became a follower of Jesus. And he was talking about how easy it is to appear holy when you're writing about it in books, but how hard it is in reality if you really believe that Jesus calls us to love our enemies. Lewis used this analogy. He said, I once went to a football match, a soccer match, and the guys behind me kind of got rowdy, and they ended up spilling an entire beer all over my head. And Lewis said, in that moment, what comes out of you, in the unguarded moment, that is the true measure of your spiritual maturity. Jesus wants us to learn to love our enemies. I'm going to read to you here Jesus' words in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27. It's an amazing passage. In fact, Jesus starts it out with these words, to those who are willing to listen. See, these are hard words for us. Many of us are not really willing to listen to this teaching. But Jesus says, to those who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer him your shirt. Give to anyone who asks, and when things are taken away from you, don't try and get them back. Do unto others as you would like them to do to you. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why would you get any credit? Even sinners do that. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners lend to other sinners, hoping for a full return. Love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High. For he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your heavenly Father is compassionate. Again, Jesus starts out, if you're willing to listen to this teaching. This is the hard stuff, guys. I know that some people think spirituality is learning all this detailed trivia about the Bible, and that's not bad. But Jesus is saying if you want to move on towards advanced spirituality, start taking on this problem of learning to love your enemies. Change your labels of people, because your labels determine so much about how you treat others. God has done this. That's the whole point. Listen to Romans chapter 5, verse 8. This is an amazing verse. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. You see, the accurate label for you and I would be sinner. But God sent his son to die for us. Love your enemies. God loved us while we were still his enemies. That's the amazing part of the gospel. Jesus in John chapter 15 is talking with his disciples. And in verse 14 and 15, here's what he says. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. No, you are now my friends, since I have told you everything the Father told me. You see, Jesus had a choice. He could look at us as slaves who owe him everything for the sacrifice he was going to make for us. But he chooses not to label us slaves. Instead, he says, I no longer call you slaves. I now call you friends. You and I are the friends of God. That is the label he put on us. And that is the power of labeling.